Back when I wrote the video Liminal Spaces a few years back, I was an angsty and anxious teenager finishing high school. I certainly didn't expect a short video like that to do as well as it did, but it seems like I caught onto liminal spaces right as they began trending. It's a video I both cringe at and still somewhat appreciate. It is difficult to talk about liminal spaces now without treading ground that's already been covered hundreds of times before, so why am I back here again? The answer should be pretty obvious. It's nostalgia, a conclusion very ironic given the subject matter. Let's begin with how I did. The Backrooms have always treaded a fine line between horror and comfort, sitting in its own nostalgic crevice. This very simple concept, that of no clipping into another infinite, almost broken reality, has been, well, oversaturated would be putting it lightly. It's been simultaneously fascinating and morbid to see how the concept has gone from a small little trend into an internet mainstay, immortalizing itself with iconic photographs, horror projects, video games, and communities. The impact of this one 4chan post can't be understated. An entire Backrooms film is coming out now. The Backrooms' starting concept are difficult to reconcile with what they are now, a community that consists of, at its core, a less moderated version of SCP, with lower writing standards, dumber premises, and an all-round unseriousness. The line between humor and grit is difficult to parse, and it's often hard to tell if the writer is 30 or 12. But I've ragged on it quite enough, I think, because as silly as the Backrooms is now, there's something to be said about how it might serve as a vehicle, a gateway for younger audiences to grow an appreciation for horror as a genre, much like how SCP-173 was one of my gateways. And why exactly are so many younger audiences drawn to the Backrooms? What made me write this Liminal Spaces video as a teenager?
The Backrooms is for kids and is just a trend until the next Five Nights at Freddy's gets created.
Without a doubt, the Backrooms was fertile ground to, make a lot of YouTube Kids content. A lot of those creators jumped on it for good reason. It's kind of just a sandbox to throw wacky characters into. I'm so grateful every day that it didn't get merged into brain rot lingo in the same way. It didn't fuse with Skibidi Toilet. Skibidi Toilet took all, they're the fall guy. To a kid, it's approachable because it looks clean and it feels clean, and it's scary, but it's easy scary for them. It's a very tame horror short, and truthfully, I don't even find it that scary. So
wow,
people like the Backrooms because it's
more mesmerizing.
Yeah, it's kind of like an intriguing space, like walking around in a dream.
As a very concept, the Backrooms are a potent ground for someone's first foray into cosmic horror. Infinite, expansive rooms that exist beyond a regular plane of reality. It is cruel in its non-violence, in the utter absence of a real villain aside from the rooms themselves, which exude this silent apathy. There is no abject terror, simply endless rooms, spatially and physically impossible, existing in a place that should not exist. It's not a particularly original concept, but two things tie it to our very present culture. For one, we have video games. As the years pass, it's become more evident that nerd culture and pop culture have become intertwined, and that applies nearly as much to gaming as it has to film. Falling through an interdimensional portal or getting sucked into a universal fold isn't a mainstream concept per se, but no clipping almost certainly is. Getting stuck on level geometry, phasing through poor collision, turning on spectator mode. It is physically impossible beyond the comprehension of reality, but we've had entire childhoods that allows it to make complete sense, context that grounds that spatial impossibility in our minds. The Backrooms is reflective of our present culture in this way, something so much easier to understand if you've played it. Along with that cultural tie-in is the second point, the nostalgic value. That may sound strange for a concept that only originated about, 2019, which was 7 years ago. Great. But regardless of its recency, especially compared to many other creepypastas, the Backrooms have always had nostalgia as an underlying element. Part of that is simple. It runs parallel to the liminal spaces trend, an aesthetic very much defined by nostalgia, often the 2000s captured in their primal form. Familiar spaces made slightly uncomfortable with their lack of individuals, with this sensation that you're the only person left. The set of a television show, a hotel you might have been to briefly as a kid. While these specific visuals and sensations of that old 4chan post might not be universal, most people have experienced something similar. whether it be a doctor's office or their parents' workplace or their church basement. There's this big emphasis on texture that seems to bring out the same emotions. Old carpet that lines an entire floor, something inherently comforting and yet which always carries the potential for decay. Peeling wallpaper in a color meant to be warm and cozy, and yet that which is falling apart, which lacks the furniture to complement it. The buzzing of light, fluorescent and cheap, humming endlessly. With how much this aesthetic feels so vital to my childhood in the transitory time between warm sodium lighting and white LED, in the shopping mall and its movement from small relaxed space to living maximalism, I have to wonder how much of this feeling will be sustained as the decades go by, when I can stop calling myself young. And this nostalgic call brings in the second element of why the Backrooms seem to have become such an effective internet concept. Because while the concept is inherently horror, nostalgia is comforting, escapist. Why do people write new Backrooms layers that have little to none of that disconcerting claustrophobia? Because that same concept of horror can be decontextualized as an escapist fantasy. There is a universal appeal of tethering yourself to the past, being a child with no obligations. What if playtime lasted forever? An infinite mall, infinite rolling fields, infinite office buildings to explore, not as an exhausted intern but as the kid of an office worker. Why do I boot up that big Gmod city map just to wander around those empty spaces? The Backrooms, the concept of an infinite space existing beyond reality, holds as much potential for fantasy as it does for existential horror. And these two concepts aren't mutually exclusive. Part of the fear is in the violation of that fantasy. The Backrooms are not clean and sterile and warm, they are buzzing, peeling, falling apart. And in that solitude, the Backrooms forces you to confront the passing of time. Only this time there's no escaping back to the real world. You will be a child forever even as the world around you ages and festers with mold. With all this in mind, it becomes evident that the Backrooms are deeply tied to the internet, to video games, to this era. It functions almost as a modern retelling of classical horror, almost like a certain Minecraft creepypasta or animated YouTube series. It helps as well that its very origin point is a random post on 4chan, such a symbol of a corner of the internet. The words of a single anonymous user have resonated with millions. Decades ago, the idea of spreading such a cultural mainstay so easily was unprecedented. Nowadays, the next big meme comes and goes like the wind, our entire lexicon being affected by trends. The Backrooms is a meme, not always a funny one, but a cultural unit that spreads between people. As a child, whenever I got scared by something, I'd usually only be terrified for one night where I envisioned that creature, that monster, creeping up on me in my bed. But just one sleepless night later, I found myself coping with it, eventually fostering some endearment to these creatures, to the stuff of nightmares. It's why I've come to adore all these characters that would otherwise be horrifying. These rooms, on the other hand, are a consistent, ever-present concept, always lingering, never really something that becomes familiar. Right? I mean, given the abstract concept and the lack of an explicit terror to overcome, surely that existential challenge would prevent it from becoming trivial, right? The Backrooms are as much of a joke as they are a horror concept and escapist fantasy, and much like many others, they aren't really scary anymore, if they ever were. What I'd like to compare the Backrooms to now is the slasher film, a genre so clearly demonstrative of the same effect. Many are familiar with Leatherface, a horror icon from the moment he first appeared on screen, and so clearly representative of the fears that pervaded America in a post-Vietnam era. Nearly every infamous horror film that came out following Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was influenced by that film in some way, so expressive of a disillusionment with the inner workings of the nation. John Carpenter's Halloween, with its even more iconic killer Michael Myers, slowly walked those fears from the blazing southern Gothic countryside to the conventional cozy suburbia, disrupting its fantastical nostalgia with the fact that the killer is inside the house. These two killers are powerful pieces of social commentary, their films bathed in atmosphere. They're powerful because of where they exist in, be it the lingering darkness around every corner of Haddonfield, or the gaping maw of a house in the middle of nowhere. But they didn't just appear in their individual movies, and they're not restricted to these locations, they're in others too. How does the horror genre expand on them? Well,
anything and you're canceled, bro.
Oh, fuck.
The way the Backrooms so quickly transformed from a simple novel concept into an elaborate series of flaws is, I think, quite comparable to slashers. You can trace how that initial fear slowly transitions into endearment. People can never get enough. People get comfortable easily. It's why IP is as sought after as it is, why we can never have just one thing. Why the success of every movie always warrants a sequel, a Longlegs prequel, a Weapons prequel, a third Five Nights at Freddy's movie, yet another Insidious movie, another scary movie, yes, really.
Stand her! Not her! My pronouns are they, them.
They don't leave, they become ingrained in our culture even as they lose more of their fear factor with every entry, even as they go from something you run from to something you can't help but love to watch as they kill a bunch of people. The films might present protagonists to you, but they struggle to keep up with the presence that emanates from the killers. The appeal moves to the excess, bursting at the seams. And the Backrooms are an interesting case of this transition from fear to love, because they aren't a person, they're a place. This repeated exposure turns this place that should be terrifying into something we want to stay with us, something we want to keep learning more about, writing more about, even if we lose their core elements in the process. It sounds difficult to mischaracterize a place, but you'd be surprised by the capability of creators to fuck things up. Michael Myers turning from a one-off conventional serial killer into the sibling of the protagonist, into an incest cult monster, into the incarnation of pure evil, back into being a conventional serial killer who occasionally experiments with brainwashing, shows just how severely different people might handle a single defined character. Level 6.1 The Snack Rooms, an infinite mall that the MEG Regimented Track Mappers organization has mapped out with friendly facelink cook entities, isn't exactly in line with the initial horror concept of the Backrooms, but it's reflective of the same effect. The reason why many people, including myself, have such a negative, almost visceral reaction to these interpretations is clear. It's a violation of the initial idea. It is demystifying this concept and these characters that feel almost sacred. For the Backrooms, it's turning them from a liminal, transitory fantasy, something deeply rooted in nostalgia, into a conventional one, a dimension that you can neatly give a floor number before clicking the submit button on the wiki entry. Notably, this doesn't make the writing inherently bad. I may find it less fundamentally interesting, but that's not to say that they don't have any artistic value. I'm sure you can find some gems in the wiki even amidst this untrue insistence that more lore makes something better. There is a Backrooms film coming out now, one based in the universe of Kane Parsons' YouTube series. His Backrooms found footage video is the single most popular depiction of this location, a video made when he was only 17, almost entirely in Blender. It is an incredible feat and it makes me feel like a complete hack. But there is already a mimetic bias that might hinder the Backrooms as a horror film. It will absolutely be a massive success for that reason. It's popular, an internet mainstay. But will it really be scary? Can it do anything interesting without prompting an eye roll? How do you prompt existential terror when that hurdle seems to have been overcome countless times already? Kane Parsons has already written quite a bit of lore. If you're using this minimal concept as a setting for a larger fictional narrative, it's fully understandable to want to elaborate on it. Leaving it as an infinite never-explained mystery might be one thing, but there is ultimately no shame in wanting to do your own spin on it. It is not a violation even if the idea of giving the Backrooms lore is not infallible. But how do you expand something that so inherently defies understanding? Giving the Backrooms any sense of rigidity or consistency will by nature take away some of its inherent horror. Kane Parsons, in expanding on the Backrooms lore by allowing it to be mapped, by allowing connections with reality, creates a risk of losing the mystique. Even if the Async Corporation didn't create the Backrooms and simply opened a portal to it, the very fact that an intentional man-made connection to it is even possible already takes away a little of its appeal. The idea that this freakish environment can only be accessed by mistake. How Kane fights these increasing physical restrictions is by emphasis of a psychological component. If you remove some of the mystique by giving the Backrooms consistency, then make that consistency something equally strange and cerebral, something that might challenge us existentially in the same way that initial ambiguity does. In this interpretation of the backrooms, the rooms themselves are reflective, repetitive, living architecture that attempts to replicate reality without understanding it. In this place, signage doesn't mean anything. House layouts don't need to account for architectural nuances. Much in the way of generative AI, it reduces reality to facades. It tries to do something, but we have no real way of knowing what that is outside of the most bare-bones replication. And it's no coincidence, I think, that the film's trailer describes the backrooms as something that remembers, over and over. The more it remembers, the less it does. A concept so tied to nostalgia culture would be about memory, wouldn't it? And the horror emerges from how it chooses to remember. It does not appear hostile or villainous in the way the House of the Davidson record is, even if such an inspiration is more than evident, even if the found footage of the film already feels reminiscent of it. It is, instead, deadly in its complete incapability to empathize or reason in the way we do. Operating on its own logic, Kane Parsons' backrooms make the familiar unfamiliar. The world you knew is gone, unrecognizable. What is culturally nostalgic, comforting, an escape, is now deadly as a siren. Because it's liminal. Because liminal doesn't mean empty. Liminal means transitory. These places were a threshold, somewhere in between, somewhere you should never be for too long, a place you ought to pass through on your journey. But the more you choose to linger, the more dangerous it becomes. Stephen King's The Langoliers was the first time I read of this concept made so literal, something I wrote about in my very first video. A place that should not exist in time anymore. Tying the physical world to the dimension of time, leaving this empty airport that exists only to get eaten away. You thought you could understand it, but it's somewhere entirely different now, displaced. It's a concept Kane is clearly compelled by. The Oldest View takes this to a very literal level, this old mall, one that's long since been demolished in reality, somehow existing underground now, preserved in an eerie state. But the exit doors lead nowhere. No one walks between the stores. The film takes a similar approach, at least from everything I've seen, stacking memory upon memory till you begin to lose something in the process, and that loss becomes the horror. Till you cannot see the forest for the trees, till this place begins to consume you. And so what emerges from these attempts to categorize, to apply some sort of logic and basis to the backrooms, is that despite all of the study, the extensive research, the government formality, and even group expeditions and organizations within, there is still a helplessness that lingers in every moment spent in this place. No matter how many entities you write and safe facilities you think you can come up with, and solutions you think will get you out of here, you will never stop hearing that hum. You will never stop walking, never stop moving, always so desperate to get home, and this place will never understand, never open its doors to let you out. Or even worse, perhaps it will. Perhaps you can leave, perhaps there's a consistency that makes it less terrifying, a consistent exit point, a threshold you can pass. But when those rooms remind you so very much of home, when it becomes something you want to keep exploring, keep learning more about, and when the world and your home calls to you in its logical, consistent safety, you may think you're already there. I have feelings about Kane Pixel's Backrooms. It is a wonderful horror project, and its very existence is a triumph of independent art, a sign, among many others, that the industry is starting to appreciate the presence of indie auteurs over the same repetitive nonsense. But I can't help but feel a little lingering anxiety. We are in something of a liminal point in the zeitgeist. I think about how the inevitable success of this film might not prompt a surge in independent creators, but an absorption of another creative into the death spiral. I think about how the success of a film like Iron Lung may just be a one-off, something only made possible by one famous YouTuber's personal funding. I am scared of things lasting too long, remaining in this transitory point forever, decaying as the culture yet clings to it. I think of how much I enjoyed Stranger Things Season 4 and how, despite that enjoyment, I couldn't help but wish it ended at Season 1. Backrooms is amazing news for anyone who loves independent art. I trust Kane Parsons to, at the very least, inject novelty and creativity into this concept. And I am very happy that he's been taking these aesthetics and doing his own thing with them too. People still live here and the oldest view are separate from the Backrooms, even if its influence is undeniable. I haven't watched Digital Circus, but the degree of its success should be celebrated. Iron Lung is amazing for one man's passion-driven work. The relationship between indie filmmaking, the internet, and horror is wonderful, and all of these works, all of these 2020's touchstones are indicative of it. But we're not out of the woods just yet. Not so long as that cultural decay continues to call, to persist, to linger. Not so long as the Duffer Brothers continue to capitalize on a series that should have ended over a decade ago. Not so long as J.K. Rowling's wallet expands as she gleefully prepares a series built on bigotry. In spite of every piece of wonderful art that might be given to us, I still believe we should tread lightly. I think we should allow things to end when we reach a stopping point. That's not to say everything should end in one go. Some of the best films in a franchise are their later entries. Often the best ones are the most radically different, diverting from the formula in a compelling way. Evil Dead's remake, Final Destination 5. The best Star Wars content in years is a spin-off TV show about a secondary protagonist from a spin-off movie prequel of the original trilogy. So hell, make Backrooms 2, make Backrooms 3, but don't make Backrooms again. Do not ruin your mystique from a need to provide the audience more comfort. Do not add the snack rooms so characters can have infinite almond water. And don't stay for longer than you need to, lest you find yourself lost in miles upon miles of the same decay. That molding, that buzzing, forever walking, exhausted, rotting, wandering, calling. Hello. I've never done a video quite like this before. It's weird. It's more critical of one specific thing, but not to the point of full media analysis. I wrote the script on a whim in 2 days with minimal edits, and I am surprisingly satisfied with how it turned out. A lot of that is thanks to my friend Mobius' little scenes in the Backrooms with my character, which turned out great. I think they're really cute. Mobius has been doing these 3D scenes for me for a while now and does wonderful artwork in general. You can check out more below. I am genuinely very excited for the Backrooms movie, and hearing that it's going to be R-rated has made me even more excited. I have a strange relationship with liminal spaces and the Backrooms in general. You know, it's something that used to be such an integral obsession, but I've slowly moved away from it as it's been turned into something very different. But despite that, I still find myself compelled by them on occasion, still feeling a little uneasy and a little comfort when I'm in one of those places alone. I hope I was able to make that clear in the video. I've been writing a lot more than usual, in case you couldn't tell, and this is one such example. My next video is something that's pretty special to me. It's a critique and analysis of Hotline Miami 2, one of the most overhated games ever and one of my personal favorites. I hope you stay around to check that out. If you'd like more content like this, which is more so analysis of a single thing, I'd like to hear it, so feel free to comment and subscribe if you're somehow still watching and haven't done so. Thank you very much for watching and have a good night.